New York City, the self-proclaimed basketball capital of the world. Except for one thing. They've never reached the top. They've never won a national championship. They've never even made a national championship. From Lou Carnesca to Rick Pitino, this town, and more in particular, St. John's itself, has seen a ton of talent pass through. From Chris Mullin to RJ Lewis to Ian Jackson and all the Shamori Ponds in between. This is the entire history of St. John's basketball, and if they can reach the peak. The story of St. John's Hoop starts all the way back in 1937, where Joe Lapchick, over the course of 12 years, turned this team into the standard for New York City basketball, and he eventually gave way to legendary head coach Frank McGuire, who would go on to win national championships at the University of North Carolina. And Frank McGuire guided the Red Storm to two separate number one rankings in the AP poll, as well as going 75-16 over his final 3 years at St. John's. In 1951, they lost in the Sweet 16, and in 1952, McGuire took them all the way to the national championship, where they would eventually lose, and then McGuire would leave for the University of North Carolina. That wouldn't be the last exchange of a player or coach between North Carolina and St. John's, however, so stay tuned for the rest of that story. But from 1952 to 1965, St. John's would only make the tournament once. And then a new sheriff came to town and changed the course, changed the trajectory of St. John's basketball. Lou Carnesca showed up in town and decided he was going to take the Johnnies back to the top of the New York basketball scene and the national basketball scene as a whole. He would lead them to 3 NCAA tournaments before the tournament expanded, remember, in 5 years, before briefly leaving to coach in the ABA for 3 seasons. When he came back in 1973, it would take him 2 years to rebuild them back to being a tournament team, but 1975-76 is when things got real. They made the tournament behind Glenn Williams and eventual NBA player George Johnson, and the following season joined the newly formed New York, New Jersey 7 basketball conference. This conference only lasted for 3 seasons, and St. John's would never win this conference. However, they made the tournament all 3 years, and the final year that they were in the conference, they went all the way to the Elite 8 on a Cinderella run as a 10 seed, led by future New York Knick Reggie Carter. The next season, they made it 5 straight NCAA tournament appearances, finishing as a 3 seed this year before ultimately getting upset in the first round by Purdue. After this season, they took a quick rebuilding year, and then it got serious. 1980 was their first Big East regular season championship, and in 1982, once they reloaded, they had a kid by the name of Chris Mullin show up on campus, who came out of the gate averaging 16.5 points a game as a true freshman. By Mullin's sophomore season, he was averaging 19 points a game, led the Red Storm to their second regular season championship of the Big East and their first conference tournament championship, and led them to the number 1 seed in the tournament, where they ultimately got upset in the second round in a heartbreaker by Georgia. And then after a somewhat disappointing junior season for Chris Mullin, they went all the way to the Final Four in 1985, one of the more memorable seasons in Red Storm basketball history. But it wasn't just Chris Mullin, who was definitely doing his part, averaging almost 20 a game. They also had future NBA players like Mark Jackson, Bill Winnington, and Walter Berry, and they would capture Lou's 3rd Big East regular season championship. In 86, they won Lou's 4th Big East regular season championship and were once again a number 1 overall seed behind future first-round pick Walter Berry. They leaned into Mark Jackson a little bit more. They still had a lot of NBA talent on this team, but they were upset in the second round after yet again being a number 1 seed. Lou Carnesca would end up coaching a few more years. He made another Elite 8 in 1991, and then in 1992 he won his final Big East regular season championship, and he would finish his St. John's career winning 5 Big East regular season titles, 3 tournament championships, and made 18 NCAA tournaments, including that Final Four in 1985. He also had 2 Wooden Award winners in Chris Mullin and Walter Berry, who won it in back-to-back seasons. and had some other NBA talent like Malik Sealy, who would lead that 91 team in scoring with 22 points a game. That would ultimately be the high watermark for St. John's basketball, however, because after this season, after the Lou Carnesca era, there was a lot of coaches, not a lot of winners. Brian Mahoney took over for the legend, and it didn't take long for them to get rid of him. He coached for 4 seasons and only had 1 winning record. Fran Fraschilla would take over for him, but only coached 2 seasons, leading them to a 7 seed in his second year behind Felipe Lopez, who would eventually play in the NBA, and a freshman year Ron Artest. After Fraschilla, Mike Jarvis took over and is actually probably one of the more successful coaches in St. John's history, leading them to a 3 seed with Ron Artest in his sophomore season, and then a 2 seed in his junior season. And the 1999 season, which was Ron Artest's sophomore year, they did go all the way to the Elite Eight. So there was some success. However, after these 2 really, really good teams, Mike Jarvis would only go to 1 more NCAA tournament, making it as a 9 seed, and was fired 4 years later. He gave way to Norm Roberts, who only had 1 winning season in 6 years. And this is kind of one of the lower points of St. John's basketball, because they are just kind of getting kicked around at the bottom of the Big East at this point. Steve Lavin would take over in 2011 and did have some success. He won 2 NCAA tournament games before eventually being replaced by St. John's legend Chris Mullin. And Lavin was a fantastic recruiter. I mean, he was bringing in top 100 recruits left and right, produced a couple of NBA players like Mo Harkless. However, he just couldn't win games with those big-time recruits, and he was actually kind of pushed out the door after winning a game in the NCAA tournament in favor of Chris Mullin, who obviously was the legendary player, the Wooden Award winner at St. John's. The Chris Mullin era was not great, to say the least. As a coach, as a player, obviously fantastic, but as a coach, not as good. He did give us one of the more memorable players in recent college basketball history, and that is Shamorie Ponds. And if you don't know about Shamorie Ponds, Go look up an edit on TikTok or something. I mean, the dude was averaging 20 a game, 5 assists, 4 rebounds, 2.5 steals, shot 45% from the field and 35% from 3, and led the Red Storm to their first NCAA tournament appearance in 5 years. However, they would get bounced in the first 4, and Mullin would not return as the head coach. Mike Anderson would be his successor, and it didn't really work out for him either. He didn't make a single NCAA tournament appearance in 4 years. So now St. John's is sitting there like, well, we're playing in New York City, where all of these elite basketball, blue chip basketball recruits are coming from every single year. We don't get any of them. We are bottom of the barrel in the Big East. We haven't made an NCAA tournament in 5 years. What are we going to do? Well, they go out and they hire the Mafia boss, Slick Rick himself, who has had his image damaged a little bit since he was obviously a national championship winning coach at Louisville, all the scandals, and him eventually leaving Louisville. He then went to Iona, which is in New York City, won 3 straight conference championships, made 2 NCAA tournaments, and now St. John's is sitting there like, look, there's a smaller school in our same city that has this guy that's won an NCAA championship before, won multiple. Let's go get him. And they do just that. In Slick Rick's first year in New York City, he goes 20-13, finishes 5th in the Big East, but he does land a couple of big-time transfer portal commits, one being a sophomore from the University of Massachusetts in R.J. Lewis, and another being a sophomore from Kansas, Zuby Ejiofor. He also landed 5-star freshman Simeon Wilcher, and you start to look around, and college basketball fans are realizing, hey, it's only a matter of time before one of the best coaches in the sport, recruiting in one of the biggest hotspots in the sport, turns this thing around, and that he did. Those 3 players would help set a groundwork for a squad that would go 31-5 in Pitino's second season in New York City. Throw in a couple of transfers like Kadari Richmond and Aaron Scott, and you've got yourself a squad that finishes, like we said, 31-5, and as a 2 seed after winning the Big East regular season and the Big East tournament. In just his second season, Rick Pitino has come into the Big East and knocked off the team that has won back-to-back national championships in the Yukon Huskies and is taking control of the conference. And while, yes, that team did get bounced in the second round by John Calipari, they just couldn't shoot the three ball. That was their Achilles heel, was the fact that they could not make a three. So what does Rick Pitino do? He goes out and hits the transfer portal hard for 2025-2026. RJ Lewis declared for the draft. Kadari Richmond and Aaron Scott ran out of eligibility, and Simeon Wilcher transferred, so he had to reload this squad around Zubi Ejiofor. He goes out and gets Bryce Hopkins, one of the top 10 transfers in this cycle, a guy that used to average 17-7 for Providence and was all Big East back in 2023 before he got injured. They bring in Ian Jackson from North Carolina. Remember I said that wasn't the final transaction between St. John's and North Carolina earlier? This probably won't be the final one either, but Ian Jackson is coming back to where he'd all started for him back in New York City, the former 5-star recruit. Another former 5-star recruit, Dylan Mitchell, will be back in New York City. Well, not back. He'll be in New York City for the first time, this time playing for Slick Rick, the Mafia boss, over there in his white suit on the sidelines. Rounding out the starting five, he brings in shooting guard Jozan Sanon, hopefully I pronounced that right, from Arizona State, another former 5-star freshman that shot 38% from three this year on 4.5 attempts, scored 12 points per game. The issue this year for St. John's will be depth. Oziah Sellers and Dylan Darling are really their only two reliable bench pieces as of now. We'll see how development works for St. John's, but they do have a 4-star as well coming in, 4-star forward. We'll see, but right now, St. John's basketball is back on the rise. With that being said, that's going to be it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy at any point, make sure to hit that like button. We're looking for about 300 likes on today's video. And with that being said, thanks so much for watching today's video.